So this new table is available under Configuration Clients Table. Primary purpose is to show the role that's associated with the particular IP address or MAC address, because that's ultimately what the whole identity subsystem is doing. Is it's bringing in radius snooped information like radius packets, or it's bringing in NAC authentication attempts, and it's building up this mapping of IP, MAC address, and what is the current role that's assigned to that IP and MAC address. And as operators of the system, especially when we're troubleshooting stuff, it's very helpful to know what that mapping is. So you can see here that this is the clients table. There are a number of different columns. The most important column in many ways is the effective role column, which we'll talk a little bit more here in a minute. The effective role is driven by the configuration of the roles dialog. So just as we talked about with NAC, and it's important in the VXLAN GPID world, the first thing you have to do in the Aruba in the Edge Connect orchestrator is go and configure a list of roles. Assign any arbitrary GPID to those roles. Those roles are then, they act as like a screening mechanism or a filter. Only the roles on this list that you see here are permitted into the system. If we snoop a role that's not on this list, then we automatically use the unknown role. That's on purpose. That's to prevent the system from being contaminated by roles that you didn't configure. So it's by design, but you have to be very careful that you have all the roles configured here that you expect to snoop or see in GPID or NAC world. So there are a couple of basic filters that you get toward the top of the page here. I want to make a quick note on the IP address and MAC address filters. Is require an exact match, which is kind of weird because it says IP/subnet. We actually have to type a specific IP address in there. And in fact, for a MAC address, you have to type, AA:BB:CC:, and so on. There are certain columns, kind of like with the Aruba Central clients table. It's like it's the merger of multiple different mechanisms that are feeding information into that table. So like on this page here, you see we have an interface column. The interface column only applies to the NAC subsystem, like 802.1x or MacAuth. We don't actually get an associated interface for radius snooped roles. So just be aware that some of the columns will be empty or populated depending on the pipeline that's feeding into that into that particular row. The NAC status and the clients table kind of work together. The NAC status is going to show you the sort of the authentication, the PA state, the EAP state, so on. But it's roughly the same information that you will see transported into the clients table. So there are all these different tables that are feeding up into the clients table to create this composite view of contextual LAN side metadata for active hosts. If you have multiple devices in a cluster, the Edge Connect will sync them. There's not a primary backup. It just merges the table across multiple devices. And that's so that if you fell over from appliance A to B, B needs to already have that identity information ready to go, because those flows are going to suddenly fail over VRP. They're going to hit the secondary Edge Connect, and you're going to we need to have the role information ready to go. We can't wait to snoop that information to build up the table. It won't work. So we transfer that information between the Edge Connects so that we have warmed the cache, if you will. And this is handled, this synchronization mechanism that I'm talking about is handled through the cluster manager. The setting that explicitly controls this thing is in the cluster profiles. It's the user session sync setting. And you can turn this on or off. It's on by default. There's really not a good reason to ever turn it off. You shouldn't do that. Additional note is that the clients table persists through reboot. So if you just reboot both of the primary and backup, just turn them off, turn them back on again, they will both come back with the clients table ready to go. Now there's just a couple CLI commands. There's a show user profile status, which will give you a little bit of information about how it's functioning, and there is also a show user profile details, which just essentially dumps the table that you see associated in the with the clients table or the clients tab itself.